Just a few more weary days and then I'll fly away to a land where joy shall never end. I'll fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. When I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away. Yeah, when I die, hallelujah, by and by, I'll fly away.
is a precious gift of hope and strength and grace from someone who has made our world a brighter and better place. It's filled with moments, sweet and sad, with smiles and sometimes tears, with friendships formed and good times shared and laughter through the years. A life well lived is a legacy of joy and pride and pleasure, a living, lasting memory our grateful hearts will treasure. Good afternoon. My name is Kevin Boland, and it's my privilege to be MC today for our time together to honor and remember the life of Eugene Dionne. We come together with sadness because someone we loved has died, but also with gratitude for a life that was full, productive, generous, and well-lived. For those who knew him well, Eugene was many things: a teacher, a builder, a gardener, a husband of 62 years, a father, and a friend. A man who believed in hard work and who seemed happiest when creating something useful with his hands. And for many here today, the memories that come first are likely not grand occasions, but the ordinary moments in life. Coffee shared in the garage, time on the lake, a conversation over the garden fence, a project being planned, or simply the comfort of knowing Eugene was there. Those are moments that become precious now. Today's service will include reading Eugene's obituary, tributes from family and friends, and a few reflections and poems as we remember and celebrate his life. I would like at this time to begin by reading Eugene's obituary. Eugene Dionne passed away on March 6, 2026, at Shuswap Lake General Hospital with his wife Sandra and daughters Joanne and Jana by his side. Eugene was born in Radville, Saskatchewan on June 3, 1942. He grew up on a farm where, if his stories are to be believed, he spent his childhood picking rocks in his family's wheat fields. He moved to Saskatoon in 1960 and attended the University of Saskatchewan, earning a Bachelor of Science degree in 1964 and a Bachelor of Education degree in 1966. After teaching in Uranium City for a few years, he moved his young family to Salmon Arm in 1970 to take a teaching position at the Salmon Arm Senior High. There, he taught drafting and coached the school curling team. He transferred to A.L. Fortune Secondary in Enderby in 1985 and returning to SASH in 1989 to teach chemistry. A self-taught carpenter, Eugene could build everything from footstools to dressers, boats to barns. But his favorite things to build were houses. In the 1970s and 80s, he would spend his summers turning the house plans he drafted all winter into reality. By the time he retired from teaching in 1992, Eugene had built an apartment block, 3 homes for his family, numerous houses in Salmon Arm, and the retirement condo complex, Florence Grove. He then went into construction full-time, building more houses in Salmon Arm and Armstrong, and the retirement condo complex, Alcide Place. In his free time, and yes, he did have free time, in his younger years, Gene loved to curl and ski in the winters, and boat around the Shuswap in the summers. A lifelong gardener, he took great pride in the fruit and vegetables he grew, especially his beloved raspberries. As he wound down his construction business, Gene and Sandra began spending their winters in Arizona and then California, where he enjoyed playing cards and shuffleboard. In recent years, he got a kick out of hosting the guys for the morning coffee in his garage at home. Eugene was predeceased by an infant son, his parents, Alcide and Florence Dionne, his parents-in-law, Alvin and Sophia Clark, his brothers Dale Dionne and Alan Dionne, his brothers-in-law Dalmar Brothen and Glenn Walker. Eugene is survived by his wife of 62 years, Sandra Dionne, his daughters Joanne Dionne and Jana Dionne, and her husband Del, his sister Sharon Walker, his sister-in-law Elaine Dionne, his brother Donald Dionne, his brothers-in-law Ron Clark, Joyce, Dave Clark, Cheryl, Greg Clark, Tammy, and Dale Clark, Joyce, and dozens of nieces and nephews, and 3 grandcats. Poem, The True Measure. A life well lived is built with pride, with honest work and love inside. He shaped the wood and framed the door, and left a mark forever. The structures stand, the walls are strong. Within our hearts, he will live on. There is something deeply meaningful about life spent building. Some people build with words, some with ideas. Eugene built with both his mind and his hands. He taught students. He coached young people. He designed homes during the winter months and raised them into reality in the summer. He planted gardens. He created places where families would gather and memories would be made. And perhaps, without even realizing it, he also built trust, friendships, and community. The true measure of a person's life is often found not in recognition or titles, but in the lasting effect they have on people around them. And judging by all of you here today, Eugene's life was rich in that kind of meaning. I would like now to invite Eugene's daughter, Joanne, to come forward and share a tribute to her father.
Oh, this is the problem. When you follow somebody who's tall, is everyone, can you hear me okay? All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for coming this afternoon. Everything in the universe can be explained by this, Dad once told me, with something of awe, even boyish wonder in his voice. This being the periodic table of the elements. I was probably in junior high then, a chemistry textbook open on the kitchen table in front of me. I can't say I shared his enthusiasm or even understood what the heck he was talking about at the time. But later I came to appreciate the brevity and beauty of the periodic table of elements. Indeed, everything in the universe could be explained by this. But could it be used to explain the story of my dad's life? I wondered a few weeks ago when I began thinking about how I might sum up a life as full as my dad's was in a 10-minute eulogy. Perhaps, I thought, the periodic table of the elements might provide a good organizing principle, some thematic through line for my talk. Dad was, after all, a chemistry teacher for many years. The first element that jumped out at me was uranium, for Uranium City, the fly-in community in northern Saskatchewan where my parents lived and Dad taught for a few years after receiving his education degree. Beyond uranium, though, I got stumped, or realized that the chemical compounds would soon get pretty complicated pretty fast, and well, that was it for that idea. So then I thought I would do a straight-up biography. I'd tell you that he was born in Radville, Saskatchewan, the middle of 5 children, and grew up on a farm. I'd tell you that he met my mom when they were in high school, when he was 17 and she was 15, and then I think back how they freaked out when I had a boyfriend at 15. And then he married her when he was 22, soon after receiving his Bachelor of Science degree. I'd tell you that they moved to Salmonarm in 1970, the year after I was born and a year before my sister was, so that my dad could take a teaching job here. But then I thought, well, if I were to do that, I may as well just read his obituary aloud to you all, and Kevin has just done a beautiful job of that, so there was no need for that. And besides, there are people here in the audience today who could tell those stories better than I could. So again, So much for that idea. So next slide. Oh, no, not yet. Sorry. I'm getting ahead of myself. Then I thought I might give you an idea of who my dad was through some of his favorite dadisms. In other words, proverbs or sayings that, taken out of context, had become cliches. Lines that Dad had no doubt once read somewhere, liked, then repeated to us over and over again. The dadism I recall hearing the most growing up was, if you want something done right, do it yourself. If you want something done right, do it yourself. So it didn't turn out to be a great team player because all my childhood, if you want something done right, do it yourself. And also, though not quite as often, the contradictory but useful when he wanted our help, many hands make light work. Many hands make light work. Or when he didn't need our help and we were just in his way, imagine him carrying an armload of 2x4s as he says this, "Get out of my road!" So you had to get out of Dad's road. Speaking of roads, when he was ready to leave for somewhere, like on those long summer drives back to Saskatchewan, you'd better be darn sure you were ready to go too. "Let's get this show on the road," he'd say, then go start the car while we scrambled to collect the last of our things. But my favorite dadism, one I have repeated often to myself over the years, was one he often posed as a question. Do you know the difference between a bad haircut and a good haircut? No, Dad, what's the difference between a bad haircut and a good haircut? About 2 weeks. Related to these dadisms, there were, of course, his quick-witted and droll one-liners. Thinking back, there are too many to count, and friends and family here today will each be able to recall their favorites. One of my favorites was whenever we received a wedding invitation in the mail, we'd say, "Hey, Dad, so-and-so's getting married. Are we going to go to their wedding?" "Nah," he'd say, barely glancing up from his paper. "We'll go to their next one." And sometimes his humor came out in other ways, like in this photo from a few years ago at Butchart Gardens. Oh, it didn't come? Oh, dear. Okay, I will explain it. So he said he was sitting on the edge of a fountain, and he was like, "Take my picture, take my picture, take my picture." And I'm like, "Why, Dad? Why do you want me to take your picture? Take my picture." So I took his picture, and it was only after I took it that he had positioned himself just so that the water was coming out one of his ears. So it's unfortunate it's not there, but we'll find it and we'll show it to you. But sayings and one-liners and funny pictures don't provide much narrative arc. So then I thought maybe I could tell the story of my dad's life through his many construction projects, especially that apartment building. I've often wondered if he'd known owning an apartment block would have involved all those trips downtown at 2 a.m. because a tenant, home from the bar, had locked himself out or an elderly lady's toilet had backed up. He once told a tenant that if it doesn't go through you, it doesn't go in the toilet. So given all that, I often wondered if he would have ever built it in the first place and run it for 45 years the way he did. 45 years as a landlord. And I think, yes, he probably would have, because that apartment was not only a consistent source of income, it was a consistent source of stories for Dad to tell at the dinner table. That 3-story building was the source of so many stories. He once said that if he were ever to write a memoir of his time as a landlord, he would call it The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Not a terribly original title, but I do wish he had written it. It would have been hilarious. It would have been hilarious. But one of my favorite of his landlord stories wasn't actually about the apartment building, however. It was about an old house on a property Dad owned further down on Shuswap Street. One day, an RCMP officer came to my parents' place to tell them they'd busted a grow-op in that house. This, I think, was back in the 90s before that kind of thing was legal, so they knocked on the door and said, "Did you know?" And the man renting it had marijuana plants and grow lights in almost every room. And my dad said, "Really? But he was one of our best tenants." He never complained. And he always brought the rent checks to us here in person. Sometimes early and surely always on time. And the RCMP officer asked, "You didn't think that was strange?" And my dad said, "No, I thought it was great." But if I told you the story of his life through his construction projects, well, there were dozens of them and we'd be here all night. So then I thought I'd tell you about some of the smaller, lesser known things that he made. Like one Halloween in the early 80s, when, this was his beard phase in the early 80s, one Halloween in the early 80s when Dad sliced a bell pepper in half and fixed it in place with toothpicks to give his jack-o'-lantern a tongue, instantly making our carving attempts look sad and uncreative. I guess he didn't get the memo that dads are supposed to help their kids, not show them up. Or like that time, also in the early 80s, when we'd tamed a feral orange kitten. Mom wouldn't allow the cat inside the house, so we found a packing box about yay big, put an old towel in it, and put the box on the stoop. But it was late October and the weather was getting colder. Soon the cardboard box wouldn't be enough to keep the young cat warm. So, and without us asking him to, Dad cut a round hole in top of the box, fit a length of heating duct into the hole, put a low wattage bulb into the tube, and then ran an extension cord into the garage. And just like that, the cat and his two still wild siblings had heat for the winter. I wrote that, and then I had to stop and think, like, did we keep those cats in a cardboard box, or did Dad actually build a wooden box? Because I was thinking cardboard would have been flammable. I don't think Dad would have stuck a light bulb. So I couldn't find the photos, so I can't remember, but I do remember that he made a heating system for the cats. Or that time, nearly a decade ago now, when a neighbor's half dozen or so chickens would invade our yard every afternoon. I thought the chickens were cute. Dad saw them as trespassers. "Those expletive chickens," Dad said. "They come over here and expletive all over my lawn." I have to remember that we're in a church, so I can't tell you exactly what he said. So instead of going to the neighbor like a normal person, Dad took some wire fencing he had stored in the barn and fashioned a small pen out of it next to our garden shed. Once he'd corralled the chickens inside it, he called me to come take a look. "How'd you get the chickens in here, Dad?" "With some frozen peas," he said. Then he quietly added, "Soaked in vodka." "Dad, you got the neighbor's chickens drunk?" He grinned and nodded. Well, the neighbor wasn't terribly impressed, but his chickens never came into our yard again. And who can forget, during the pandemic, Dad's rendition of a coronavirus, a yellow tennis ball stuck with red, blue, and green pushpins hung in our entry door window. Signal of the plague. I mean, really, what kind of mind comes up with this? But perhaps the most famous or infamous small thing Dad ever built was a scale model of a water metering system that City Hall wanted him to install when he was building Alcid Place in 2003. Some of you may remember this. When Dad refused to install the system because it was not only inefficient but dangerous, City Hall shut off the water to Dad's development. So Dad built this model, complete with the cutout of a human for scale, his homemade Gumby doll, and took his dispute to the media. Again, what kind of mind comes up with this stuff? So yeah, Dad fought City Hall. They say you can't fight City Hall, but Dad did, and he won. So for those who might not be able to see, it says developers water on for now, but it stayed on. So after he beat them, Dad decided to try joining them and he ran for mayor in 2005. This was one of his campaign ads in the Salmon Arm Observer. Unfortunately, election day results were not what he'd hoped for. He finished 5th out of 6 candidates with only 442 votes. But the whole point of his running for mayor was to try running for mayor. He tried because he thought he could, and he had fun doing it. 2005 wasn't his first run for City Hall. Many of you will remember that nearly 30 years earlier, in 1976, after living in Salmon Arm for just 6 years, he ran for alderman, rocking his best Elvis Vegas look. Some of you will be surprised to learn that a key component of Dad's platform in 1976 was to give assistance to various underprivileged groups, like one-parent families. How shockingly socialist of him. Some of you may be further surprised to learn that back in Saskatchewan in the early 1960s, Dad campaigned for Tommy Douglas, that commie. Anyway, the results in 1976 weren't what Dad had hoped for either. He placed 5th out of 7 candidates with 907 votes, not enough to win him a seat at the table. But he was grateful for those votes all the same, and placed this ad in the Observer the week after the election. So he said, to all of those who had voted for me, my sincere thank you. So yes, there was the question of how to write Dad's eulogy, but there was also the question of how to end it. Maybe, I thought, if I went with the table of elements idea, I could end his eulogy with the chemistry of cremated remains. Shocking. I could tell you that Dad was now 47.5% phosphate, a phosphorus compound, 25.3% calcium, 11% sulfate, a sulfur compound, 3.7% potassium, 1.12% sodium, and 1% chloride, a chlorine compound, with traces of a dozen or so other compounds and elements. But then I thought that some people might find that weird, or morbid, or just inappropriate. But I don't. I find it interesting, and I think my dad would too. This is, after all, the stuff of the universe. So then I searched how to end a eulogy, and Google suggested using a poem. A poem? Dad wasn't much of a poem kind of guy. Well, he did like Coleridge's The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, you know, the one about the sailor with the albatross around his neck, which always made me wonder. But anyway, okay, a poem. Google suggested these lines from Emily Dickinson. Really, Google? And for those of you who can't read it, can't see it, it says, because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me. And I thought, really, Google? When it comes to funerals, these lines have probably become so cliche, and taken out of context, these lines lose their original meaning, and wait a minute. Because I could not stop for death, he kindly stopped for me, actually sounds like something Dad might say. A dadism, because my dad couldn't stop for death. He was too busy. Dad was a guy who got up at 7 every morning and showered and dressed before he left his bedroom, because he always had somewhere to go and something to do. Getting a little dry mouth, I'll just take a break. Just a few years ago, I recall thinking that my parents, then in their late 70s and early 80s, probably had more energy than I did. A cousin texted me a couple of days after Dad died, and she said that her Uncle Eugene always seemed so young. And he did, because his mindset was young. A perfect example of this was in January of 2024, when I was visiting my parents at their winter trailer park in Palm Springs. Dad, then 81, suggested we go visit the neighbors. The neighbors being Frank Sinatra and Sonny Bono, among other famous people in the cemetery across the street. Dad said he'd catch up with us in a few minutes, so Mom and I set off, walking dutifully half a block down to the crosswalk where we waited for the lights. And then as we crossed, I glanced up the street and saw a rotund, white-haired, balding fellow leaping like a ballerina across 4 lanes of traffic on a busy Palm Springs road. "Is that Dad?" I asked. "Of course it's Dad," Mom said. "The rules don't apply to him." But this past winter, his famous energy seemed to suddenly disappear, and he quickly, alarmingly quickly, became unable to do the things he loved to do. Then a hospital scan confirmed the worst. When Dad decided to apply for MAID, we were, of course, devastated. But we also knew that things weren't going to get better, and that he was ready to go. And if we'd learned anything in our time with him, it was that when Dad was ready to go, he was ready to go. So death had indeed stopped for my dad, but then Dad became impatient with death. Of course he did. He wasn't going to wait around. And it was almost as if we could see Dad out in the car in the driveway, revving the engine, saying to death itself, "Let's get this show on the road." Thank you, everybody.
Thank you for those memories, Joanne. At this time, I would like to invite Eugene's former neighbor, Lisa Garnham, to come forward.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to see some familiar faces, friends and family of Sandra and Eugene's that I've met over the years. I want to thank Sandra and Joanne and Jana for inviting me to speak today. I'm honored. Nervous AF, but honored. As Kevin said, my name is Lisa. I met Sandra and Eugene 23 years ago when I moved to Salmon Arm and moved in next door. I was told the neighbor was a developer. The first time I saw Eugene, I thought, this can't be the man we were told about. He had on jeans, a button-up shirt, a scrunched-up old hat, and I'm thinking to myself, this looks like some farmer from Saskatchewan. And yes, it was Eugene. Soon after the first meeting, Eugene took a few planks out of the fence that bordered our yards, and Sandra came over with a bucket of the famous prized raspberries and introduced herself. And so the friendship began. I'm not sure Eugene knew what he was in for, as this gave me perfect access to their house and nearly daily visits, and also to the garden, which he shared much of his bounty with. As you know, Eugene was a teacher as one of his careers. Even though I wasn't one of his students, he did teach me a thing or two. Many card games, in which he was ruthless, a couple of yard games, ladder ball or dinkle ball, and cornhole. He taught and trusted me to use his garden tractor. He taught me how to text on my old LG flip phone. He probably regretted that too, as I often had a question or two to ask him. He taught me the nicknames he had for some of the locals. I won't repeat them today. There is one name I can share that I don't think will offend anyone. It was a name that I referred to Eugene and his coffee buddies. I always referred to them as the Knowledge Network. And would always ask if any world affairs got solved that day at coffee. I had a couple nicknames for him too, 2 Degree Dionne and Old Fart. I never did find out what he called me. One very important thing he taught me that I will always remember is to have Dairy Queen ice cream cake on your birthday. Even if it's not on that day, within the month is okay. We celebrated many birthdays together this way. Excuse me. If you get the chance in the next couple of days, treat yourself to one and think of Eugene, as today is his birthday. I taught him something as well, that he should never wear socks with sandals. When they started going down south, I reminded him this wasn't cool or fashionable, especially when wearing shorts. At his 65th birthday, they had a party at their place, and when I arrived, Eugene was wearing gray wool socks, sandals, and shorts. He thought it was so funny when he saw my reaction. For his 80th birthday, I gave him these socks, and they look like you're wearing socks with sandals. I could go on with the stories, the help Eugene gave me, or the opinions he shared, whether I wanted to listen or not, but I'll keep them in my memories and call on them when I need to laugh or cry. One last thing. Eugene and I used to talk about winning the lottery, and he would buy me the odd ticket. Even though I never did win any money, I feel very lucky to have had Sandra and Eugene in my life. Thank you.
Thank you for those memories, Lisa. Now I'd like to call upon his nephew, Mike Dionne, to come forward and share some memories.
I should have went first. And this microphone might make my voice crack, but honored to be here. Favorite family holidays when we were kids, here with you guys. Houseboating on the Shuswap. 7 days, 2 Dionnes, 1 captain. And 2 women running the gallery. 4 kids being told what to do constantly, but it was good. Lifetime memory. Uncle Eugene, one of the smartest men. I didn't even know what a visionary was, and we had one. Right? From a dream to paper to in the dirt to build. I mean, this place is full of his legacy. And as a nephew, that sucks trying to catch up to him. But I'm not anything near him. But I've done some of the same things. And I don't know who he had, but I built some pretty cool things and get in way over my head and drowning, and I'd phone 833. And the guy that's always busy, hey, what are you doing? Well, I got a problem. Talk it over, come up with a plan. Unreal. Never too busy for the phone call or the visit. That's nothing what I wrote down here either. This is the one I was thinking I was going to do. But as an adult, when I talk about Uncle Eugene, you're there too, Sandra. Like, you guys were always together. Pretty tough act to follow that fella. But what a blessing to have him on our team. And when it come to family, Uncle Eugene, at family reunions and gatherings, the look on his face, he just knew. And out of all the family gatherings, this is the one he would have hated to be at the most. But it's pretty good that we're all here. Thanks for letting me share.
Thank you, Mike. Now I'd like to call upon Daryl Marin to come forward, and he's also was a childhood friend and longtime friend.
Sandra, the girls, friends and relatives of Eugene. Before I really get started here, I want to point out that there's a few similarities between Eugene and I. Eugene started out as a teacher and ended up in business. I started out in business and ended up teaching. I also spent 18 years in civic politics. Apparently those phone calls back and forth with Eugene when he was running for civic office didn't provide him with the right answers. We met each other way back in 1953 in grade 6 on our first trip into a town school. We both started out in a one-room country school. Not the same school, they were 3 miles apart. I went to one, he went to the other. But that was back, if you can remember long enough, Sharon could, that you gathered around the little kids around the flagpole in the morning, weather permitting, and raised the Union Jack. And you sang, "O Canada," or "The Maple Leaf Forever." That one's kind of lost to history, isn't it? It's not around anymore, but those were some of the things that happened in these small country schools when you were just a little kid. If legend has it right, you walked 1.5 miles to school before 9 o'clock, walked 1.5 miles home at 3:30, uphill both ways. Those one-room country schools, you were taught differently than you were after you got into a town school. The teacher had to look after several grades, maybe 3, 4 grades, whatever. So the 1 hour that you had selected for a particular class, she might talk to you for 15, 20 minutes. Then you were on your own for the rest of the period, either reading something that had associated with what you were studying in that particular hour, or a workbook that you worked through. Before the end of that hour, you had accomplished something. You felt positive about what you had done. This was the very beginnings of people like Eugene becoming entrepreneurs. He was satisfied that his jobs were well done before he ever reached the age of going into business, doing things for himself. There was a particular history in our town of the Dionne family. They settled in our town before it was a town, actually, 1909, 10, and 11. Eugene's great-grandfather and his family came from Manitoba. Give them credit for that. And they settled in Radville probably because the gentleman that owned the quarter of land that the town was going to be built on was a friend of theirs and had worked for them, a man by the name of Conrad Paquin. So the Dionnes bought land and built adjacent to town. A homesteader could also get a second quarter of land called a preemption, of which Conrad Paquin did, and it was between where the town was going to be here and where the first Dionne farm was. Dionne Sr. and Paquin formed a small coalition where they would sell lots and develop this second quarter of land that Paquin got, because this was going to be like a bit of a gold rush. There was going to be people rushing in to buy land and build houses because it was a railroad center. There was a lot of railroaders, and I believe at one time there was something like 18 engines running out of Radville. So there was a lot of people involved in the railroad. Well, they find out a couple of years later that selling lots and developing this second quarter of land was highly illegal. There was a lot of trouble ensued. However, the Dionne family won. And that's the part of Radville that is known as Frenchtown, still there today. So Eugene believed very seriously about the Dionne history in the town of Radville. He believed family was very important. Part of the reason that he gave a legacy to his parents here in Salmon Arm with 2 of the housing developments. The Dionne family had so much land around the town of Radville, and that people that had married Dionne girls back at the beginning of the century, affiliated with the Dionnes, had land scattered from Radville to maybe 6-7 miles from town. And Eugene told me that you could ride horseback or walk from Radville to that far farm and walk on Dionne land all the way. They had it all. However, he also told me that these Dionne people were not farmers, even though they had all the land. They were tradespeople. They were bricklayers. They were stonemasons. They built with cement. They were carpenters. They were tradesmen. They weren't farmers. So the land was lost to someone who could farm, and they continued on as tradespeople. Eugene had a unique skill in that he could pick up a piece of lumber and through 3D vision or something could visualize a finished product with it. This was very apparent when we were in shop in high school. He could take this piece of valuable oak or walnut or something like that, and if he needed a door on something, he could pick up that piece of wood, look at it, and visualize the drawer. Run it through the saw a few times, and when he was finished, it was a door. For the rest of us, if we ran it through the saw once, it was junk. That skill was recognized by one of the, actually the John Deere dealer at that time, his wife, Madeline Brassa, and got Eugene, I'm not even sure he had a driver's license yet, but to move to the lake in the summertime during school holidays and build and renovate cabins at the lake for people who worked for Barassa's. He eventually built something for himself. But that was a trait early on that he developed so thoroughly that his skills were in demand. Throughout high school, I guess small town life had a life of its own, and Saturday night was a big thing in these towns. Everybody came to town to shop. All the farmers came in. Once we had driver's licenses, our job was to drive around town all night. Drive up the street, make a U-turn, come back up and back and forth, maybe around the block once in a while. But anyway, this one particular night, there's three of us, Eugene, Lyle, and I, driving around, really accomplishing nothing. And a couple of cars from Weyburn show up. Eugene made some derogatory remark about their cars, and they took the challenge. The race was on. 5 minutes, we meet up at the far street. It's 2 blocks long and ends up out in the field, probably Dionne Field. So we have a drag race. Rocks are flying, cars are fishtailing, whatever. We ended up out in the field and stopped. But then we discovered that one more car had joined our little race. Damn, it's the RCMP. So the drivers all get charged, but Eugene gets charged too. And I have been racking my brain for the last 2 months to try to remember what his charge was, and I can't. The charge was frivolous, yet if the judge didn't throw it out, it was serious. I can't remember what it was. It was so serious that his dad ended up in court with us. Thought he was going to have to do some talking, or whatever, I don't know. But anyway, the judge read the charge, asked the officer that wrote out the ticket the particulars about it, and the judge threw it out immediately. Eugene didn't even have to plead not guilty. So anyhow, for the rest of this, you beat the RCMP at something once, you got to avoid this situation where you see them again. So for the rest of the summer, we weren't around Radwell very much on Saturday nights. 1960, Eugene takes off for Saskatoon, and I moved to Calgary. But the day before I moved to Calgary, which is Sharon's wedding, I get a phone call at noon from Eugene. He's on his way home from Saskatoon with a friend of ours, and they failed to negotiate a curve at Finlater and roll the car. So Eugene calls me. He says, could you come and pick me up at Weyburn? I'm going to hitchhike to Weyburn, and I expect to be there at a certain time. Okay, you bet, yep. So I go to Weyburn, wait, not very long actually. The time that he had anticipated was very close to when he got there. And this new car drives into the lot where I'm supposed to meet him. And the door opens, Eugene gets out of the driver's seat. He's hitchhiking. But you know, at that time, hitchhiking was a totally different deal than it was 10 years later even. You know, there was a lot of college kids hitchhiking at that time. Everything looked neat, they were clean and tidy. A driver would pick them up, talk to them for 10 minutes, sort of assess their character, and then ask them if they wanted to drive. Eugene ended up driving to Weyburn. I picked him up. We go home, Sharon's wedding. Okay. 1964, Sandra and Eugene are married. We're all in university. I'm back in Saskatoon by that time. And Uranium City appears, and then back to Salmon Arm. And there's a period of about 10 years there. I hardly ever see Eugene. Just on a trip back to Radwell if they happened to come, and it was very seldom. But once he got back into Salmon Arm here, I drove through Salmon Arm periodically, and we'd stop and see each other and have a visit. And just compare notes of where we were at and what was happening and what our dreams might be and if it's any chance of fulfilling them or not. And then into the 1980s, we came out here skiing one Christmas holiday, I believe, and I contacted Eugene. Well, we spent a couple of days on the ski hill, riding the lift together and discussing, things like teaching, building buildings, houses, developments, business in general, politics. That was a fair subject, but we didn't have much argument there. And one of the conversations we had as we were riding up the ski lift one day was that Eugene told me that his dad had given him a quarter of land. I just remarked, well, if you get more, I'll farm it for you. Okay, it was left at that. A few years later, when Dale sold Eugene some land, some of the neighbors in our community were pretty aggressive about new land that may be for rent. So Eugene was contacted immediately about this other family renting his newfound land. I didn't know anything about any of it at that time yet. And Eugene said, no, Daryl's going to farm it. That's the kind of deals you made with the guy. They were firm. They were right on the money. They never changed until you changed them. That particular deal went on for several years until the technology in the farming changed, and we made a new deal for the new technology. And the last deal that we ever made on it, I was sitting in Eugene's house here, gave him a check for his land rent, and he came out of his office with a little slip of paper with a new deal. Here, put this in your pocket, he said. That's the way you dealt with the guy. It was just perfect. I've never experienced deals being made so easily and so fair as they were with Eugene. Sandra and Eugene holidayed in Radville in the fall, often. And Eugene would come out and jump on the combine for a few hours every afternoon, and we'd have our great old discussions sitting there in the combine. And it's too bad he wasn't a farmer. He absolutely loved farming, and or at least at that stage. Maybe he loved the money. I don't know. But it was good. Technology was changing. There was good money in farming, and we had a lot of fun with it. In the 2000s, Eugene and Sandra started traveling to Arizona, and Marlene and I were down there. And we get together a few times a year in the winter. Other than that, there were 2 phone calls a year, June the 3rd and October the 25th. We called each other on our birthday every year for the last 20 years, I suppose. And that was always an important phone call. This year, 2026, February, I'm sitting in a condo in Arizona, and the phone rings, and it's Eugene, and I'm elated. They're living over in Palm Springs. We're going to get together. Something's happening here. We're going to have... His voice is subdued. I says, where are you? He says, back in Salmon Arm. Then he tells me his fate. I was in shock. I gave him my sympathy, and I couldn't really talk. I said, I'll call you in a few days, Eugene. After that call, my computer's sitting on the table, playing soft music. Terry Jacks, Seasons in the Sun. Unreal. It sounded like Eugene was telling me, without having to use his own voice, what was going on with him. You know, it was unreal. Oh, my friend, it's hard to die. By the time I had replayed this 3 or 4 times that afternoon, we start concentrating on the other part of the song. We had joy, we had fun, we had seasons in the sun. It was beautiful. In conclusion, a few years ago, my youngest daughter gave me one of these Memorate things, a bit of a subscription to a questionnaire asking grandparents some fairly personal questions about their growing up so that they can pass it on to their grandchildren. And here's one that I answered. It's friendship that withstood time. I think of Eugene Dionne as one of those rare friendships that quietly anchors your life. We met in grade 6, swept together by the ordinary currents of school corridors, shared classes, some jokes, and from that very beginning, something steady took hold. The years that followed were not dramatic, but they were full of small, reliable moments that stitched two lives together. Mutual jokes, study sessions, and the unspoken understanding that whatever changed around us, we would remain connected. We don't see each other often. Time and distance have a way of rearranging plans. Still, we find each other a couple times each year, usually by phone. Those calls are simple and immediate. No catching up required. No awkward pauses to fill the gaps of years gone by. We pick up exactly where we left off, as if the intervening months were only a brief comma in a long sentence. There is comfort in that seamlessness. Our conversations moved easily from old memories to current worries and back again, and the rhythm of our thinking often matched. We have been similar in our outlooks for as long as I can remember. A shared sense of humor, comparable values, and a habit of seeing the same threads in life. That similarity makes our unions feel like reconnection, less like reconnection, and more like a homecoming. What endures is not frequency, but fidelity. Even when years pass between visits, Eugene's presence is a steady one, an ember that never truly goes out. Friendship, in our case, has been a patient thing, not always loud or visible, but always there, ready to be picked up and warmed anew. I am grateful for that quiet consistency, for a bond that began in grade school in a hallway and continues to travel with us through whatever comes next. Rest in peace, Eugene.
Thank you, Gerald. Now I'd like to invite our final speaker to come forward, Doug Adams, and he's going to be speaking as a friend and as a coffee buddy.
That's going to be a tough act to follow. As mentioned, I'm Doug Adams. I was asked to speak, and thank you, Sandra, for including our group in the discussion today. I'm speaking on behalf of the Old Boys Coffee Group that gets together for an hour every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we have done that for years. We met at one time at McDonald's for years in Francis Hagel's house, and then the senior center, but our favorite place was Eugene's garage. He was always the perfect host. He providing coffee, offering seconds, later all the while taking in the antics in the room. And I wouldn't go so far as to say it was a knowledge network. I think that might have been a mistake there. So any given day, it could include Roy, Bill, Gary, Burl, Gord, Keith, Bert, Grant, Don, Len, Eugene, myself, and in the earlier years, Francis and Eric. So yeah, there's a big group. The group could be just 4 old guys getting together, but many times there were 10 offering their opinions, stories about the old days, politics, sports, and gossip. Every conversation will start with weather and somehow end up with knees, hips, and shoulders. But it is a bit ironic, though I don't recall Eugene ever having any health problems or surgery, although he always showed a lot of interest in getting updates on any of the group that had health issues, and believe me, there's lots of them. Eugene was always very interested in stories about the farm back in the prairies. Been alluded to before. Most of us had grown up on the prairies, so before moving to Salmon Arm, so the conversations often led back to the farm. For anyone that came back from a visit of the prairies, or Keith with his harvester, Eugene would have wanted to an update on the crops, the yields, the prices, and the equipment. He always had a farm magazine on the table and often would point out articles that he highlighted. You can take the man out of the farm, but you can't take the farm out of the man. He was also very proud of the harvest of his garden. Often he would bring some of those famous raspberries or cucumbers or fruits and vegetables and encourage us to take them home. My wife Donna especially liked it when Eugene's Concord grapes were in season because they were delicious and up for grabs. I was always impressed by Eugene's knowledge about many topics. You could tell he took a keen interest in science and how things worked. A former student recently told me Mr. Dionne was the best chemistry teacher he ever had. Sorry if there's other chemistry teachers here, but Eugene had a construction and development company, which has been alluded to with the projects that he had in Salmon Arm and Armstrong. But he was not a fan of bureaucrats or nitpicking building inspectors. I can just imagine some of the conversations with the various city planners if they were not in agreement with Eugene's plan. Roy tells a story. As we all know, Eugene went outside of the lines at times. He and Sandy visited Roy and Inky in Palm Springs one winter. Shortly after arriving, a security guard came to the door to ask Eugene to return to the gate. Apparently, he didn't park and get processed as requested. Surprise, surprise. He was a great conversationalist, and because he lived in Salmon Arm and taught school here and then started his development company, he knew so many people, and he was always aware of what was going on in the developments that were coming on. During coffee, he wasn't afraid to say what he thought about a construction project that was going on in town and how the contractor or designer were not doing it as he thought he should be done. No holding back from Eugene on those thoughts. The coffee group had their finger on the pulse of Salmon Arm when Eugene was around and back from his winter vacation. As a side, I knew Eugene in terms of generosity. He once told me he liked to support children initiatives. So in my capacity as fundraiser for the new Children's Discovery Center at R.J. Haney Heritage Village, I approached he and Sandra to hear a presentation about the projects that we had planned. He sat quietly, asked some questions, and then they left to think about it. I get a call from our bookkeeper the next day to say they donated $5,000 towards the project. A couple of minutes later, she called me to say she had misread the check. It was $50,000. We were elated. Eugene did not want any fanfare or any particular announcements, but he was pleased to help since children were involved. An outstanding tribute to his generosity. From all the coffee guys, Eugene, you are missed in so many ways, but we're thankful for the times we had together. Thank you.
Thank you to all our speakers that did such a wonderful job today. The empty chair in the garage, the quiet garden rose in spring, the phone call we still think about making. These routines we hardly noticed until they changed. But those ordinary moments are also where love continues to live. Because grief is not the opposite of love. Grief is the continuation of love. And today, through every story, every memory shared, we are reminded that Eugene's life continues in the people who knew him and loved him. A life like Eugene's reminds us that legacy is rarely built in dramatic moments. It is built slowly, through steady work, through showing up, through helping others, through caring for family, through friendship maintained over the decades, and through the countless small things done faithfully over time. Eugene seems to have been a man who understood the value of those things. As we leave here today, may we remember Eugene not only for the things he built with lumber, tools, and plans, but for the life he built around the people he loved. On behalf of the Dionne family, thank you for being here today, for your support, for your presence, and your memories. This concludes the service, and I would like to ask everybody to join with the Dionne family for a time of fellowship and refreshments, and continue celebrating his life and celebrating his birthday. If you'd like to please rise.